There is a photograph. It is slightly faded at the edges. The paper has aged unevenly, as if it has been handled more than it should have been. In the center of the image stands a tall wooden tower, thin, skeletal, rising above a flat landscape with an almost unnatural confidence. No wires connect it to anything, no visible source feeds it, and yet, according to the notes attached to this photograph, it was built to send power through the air. The structure is known as Wardenclyffe, and the man standing beside it, almost blurred by the long exposure, is Nikola Tesla. At first glance it looks like an experiment, but the longer one looks, the more it begins to feel like something else, something incomplete, something interrupted, because the tower was never finished, not because it failed, but because something changed, and that change did not happen in isolation. If you move forward through the records, the pattern becomes less subtle. There are other photographs, other laboratories, other prototypes that seem to appear and then quietly disappear. Not destroyed, not disproven, just abandoned. In early electrical demonstrations, there are reports of energy being transmitted without wires across short distances, lamps lighting up with no direct connection, observers describing it with a mix of confusion and curiosity. The physics, at least at the time, did not fully reject the possibility, but something else began to take shape alongside these experiments. A different approach, more structured, more measurable, and importantly, more controllable. At the same time that Tesla was experimenting with wireless transmission, another system was being built, not in isolated fields, but in cities. Dense, expanding, industrial. This system relied on wires, it required infrastructure, it required meters, and it required something else. Ownership. The name most often associated with this system is Thomas Edison. Edison's model was not just about generating electricity, it was about distributing it in a way that could be tracked, sold, and expanded. Each connection point could be counted, each household could be measured, each unit could be billed. And as cities grew, this model scaled naturally. It fit into the economic structure that was already forming. Factories, utilities, standardization. Tesla's work, by contrast, moved in a different direction. His idea of energy did not stop at distribution. It extended toward accessibility. He spoke about drawing power directly from the earth, about making it available without the need for direct connection, without the need for meters. And this is where the narratives begin to diverge, because in the historical records there is a moment that is often referenced, a conversation, not fully documented but repeated often enough to persist. When Tesla presented his vision of wireless energy to investors, one of them asked a simple question. The investor was J.P. Morgan, and the question was, where do we put the meter? It is a practical question, not philosophical, not scientific, but structural. Because a system without measurement is difficult to monetize, and a system that cannot be monetized struggles to survive in an industrial economy. After that moment, funding for Wardenclyffe slowed, then stopped. The tower remained, but the work around it faded, and gradually the narrative shifted. Tesla became known more for his earlier contributions, alternating current, motors, transformers, the parts of his work that fit into the existing system. The rest became less emphasized, not erased, but not expanded either. At the same time, Edison's model continued to grow. Power plants were built, grids were expanded, meters became standard. The idea of paying for electricity became normalized, and over time, it became invisible, not questioned, just assumed. But if you look closely at the timelines, there are small inconsistencies, moments where alternative approaches appear, briefly, then disappear. In the early 20th century, there are patents filed for wireless transmission systems, some referencing resonance, others referencing atmospheric conduction. Most never move beyond the prototype stage. In some cases, the inventors vanish from the record. In others, the patents are acquired and then not developed further. It is not unusual. Innovation often produces more ideas than can be implemented, but the pattern is consistent enough to notice. Ideas that align with centralized distribution tend to scale. Ideas that bypass it tend to stall. This is not necessarily intentional. It may simply be structural. Systems tend to favor what sustains them, and an energy system built on infrastructure naturally supports solutions that require infrastructure. Over time, this becomes self-reinforcing. Educational institutions teach the dominant model. Investors fund within its boundaries. Regulations are built around its assumptions, and anything outside it begins to feel impractical, not impossible, just incompatible. There are also quieter cases, inventors who worked on localized energy systems, devices that claimed to reduce dependency on centralized grids. Some demonstrated publicly, some documented in small journals. Most never scaled, not because they were proven false, but because they did not integrate easily into the existing framework. And integration in a complex system is often more important than possibility. Because a system is not just technology, it is agreements, standards, expectations, and once those are established, they are not easily replaced. Even if alternatives exist, by the mid-20th century, the structure is fully formed. Power generation is centralized, distribution is controlled, consumption is measured, billing is continuous, and the idea of energy as a utility is complete. At this point, Tesla's earlier vision feels distant, not disproven, but disconnected, almost theoretical. Even though parts of it were demonstrated, even though the underlying physics was not entirely dismissed, it simply did not become the system. And that distinction matters, because history often remembers what becomes standard, not what was possible. If you look at other industries, similar patterns emerge. In transportation, early electric vehicles existed before gasoline dominance. In communication, decentralized systems appeared before centralized networks took hold. In each case, the model that allowed for control, measurement, and expansion became dominant, not necessarily because it was the only option, but because it aligned with the economic structure of the time. Energy is no different. Once a billing system is established, it creates a predictable revenue stream. Predictability attracts investment. Investment reinforces infrastructure. Infrastructure defines possibility, and over time the system becomes stable, difficult to replace. Even if alternatives exist, even if those alternatives are technically viable, because replacing a system is not just about technology, it is about replacing everything built around it, the contracts, the regulations, the expectations, and perhaps most importantly, the habits. Today, the global energy system still follows the same basic principle. Energy is generated, distributed, measured, and billed. There are variations: renewable sources, decentralized grids, microgeneration. But even these often integrate into the same framework. They are measured, connected, accounted for. The meter remains, not necessarily as a physical device, but as a concept, a point of control, a point of transaction. And this brings us back to the question that was asked more than a century ago: where do we put the meter? It is not just a question about a device. It is a question about the nature of the system itself, because a system without a meter operates differently. It shifts control, it changes incentives, it alters the relationship between provider and user, and that kind of change is not small, it is structural. Which is why such systems are rarely adopted quickly, not because they are impossible, but because they require everything else to change with them. And systems tend to resist that. If you return to the photograph of Wardenclyffe, it begins to look different, not like a failed experiment, but like a point of divergence, a moment where two paths were possible. One path led to a system where energy flows freely, with minimal direct control. The other led to a system where energy is distributed, measured, and monetized. One is difficult to structure economically, the other integrates seamlessly into existing models. The choice, in practice, was not made in a single moment. It emerged gradually, through investments, through decisions, through the quiet alignment of incentives. And once it solidified, it became normal, so normal that it is rarely questioned. Electricity arrives, the meter records, the bill follows, and the system continues. But occasionally small details remain. Old patents, archived experiments, photographs of towers with no wires. They do not disrupt the system. but they sit at its edges, quietly, unresolved, and if you look at them long enough, a different kind of question begins to form. Not whether Tesla was right, not whether Edison was wrong, but whether the system we have is the only one that could have existed, or simply the one that was chosen, and if it was chosen, what exactly determined that choice? The photograph does not answer. It only shows the tower, standing alone, unfinished, still pointing upward, as if it was built for something that never fully arrived.